Anorexia, addiction, and astronomy. These unlikely themes are gracefully woven together in Sarah Gerard's debut novel, Binary Star. It tells the story of a young couple with heavy emotional baggage. They embark on a cross-country road trip in hopes of finding their own way to shine in a sky full of stars. Joining me now is author Sarah Gerard. Sarah, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, congratulations on the enormous success of Binary Star, named one of 2015's best books by NPR, BuzzFeed, Vanity Fair. For those who haven't read the book, can you briefly describe the plot and those themes you...
So the narrator is an anorexic astronomy student who goes on a road trip with her long-distance alcoholic boyfriend, and they become involved in radical politics and begin to plan political direct action. And it follows sort of the metaphorical story of a binary star system.
What exactly is a binary star, and why does it work so perfectly as not only the title, but as a metaphor for their relationship?
A binary star is a star system consisting of two stars that orbit their common center of mass, and they can take various configurations. One star could be orbiting another, or they could be orbiting the empty space between them, and the inevitable end of a binary star system is a very violent one. The two stars destroy each other. It's a useful metaphor in talking about something like addiction or codependency, or an abusive relationship, or even a body under late capitalism. Thanks.
So on their road trip, John, who's the boyfriend, he promises not to consume alcohol, which is his addiction, and the narrator, who's bulimic, promises to consume food.
Right.
It doesn't go very well. They don't actually abstain from their addictions on the road trip, but why is the journey still so important?
Well, as a writer, it was useful because they had a course to follow, so I always knew, even while I was exploring all of these really kind of ephemeral and abstract concepts, it gave them a place to go. The plot was always moving forward.
And you've spent some time on the road yourself, traveling not by car, but by freight trains. Can you talk about those experiences?
Sure. So in October of 2012, I published an article in the New York Times called From Hunger that told the story of a traumatic accident that I incurred while I was recovering from anorexia. About 2 months after leaving inpatient rehab, I kind of linked up with this guy who was also newly sober from intravenous drugs, and we decided to run away together. He had some friends who had hopped freight trains, and I was kind of desperate to leave the relationship that I was in, which had been very abusive and enabling, and decided to leave with this other person. So about 2 months after we hit the road, we boarded a train and were on it overnight for about 10 or 12 hours and ran out of fresh water and didn't have any food, and it was raining the whole time. And so finally, pulling into the Buffalo station, we decided to deboard the train, but we didn't wait for it to stop moving completely. We waited for it to slow down, but then it didn't slow down as much as we thought it had or something, and I jumped off and tripped on the gravel and landed on the railroad tracks on my face, and was in the hospital for a few days. And that began what I think was the real, that was when I finally decided to fix my life.
How was that the jump-starter defining moment in your recovery from anorexia?
Well, I had been to rehab. I was there for 2 months and did a lot of really hard work there, but even after leaving rehab, I relapsed quickly. I didn't start, starving myself again or throwing up my food again, but I was spending a lot of time with this woman who was also in rehab with me and had known my ex, and we just started kind of raising hell together. We were drinking a lot, and she was shoplifting, and I had absorbed some of the things that I learned in rehab, but they hadn't really sunk in yet. I think I still kind of considered myself immortal, and still carried around a lot of anger at myself and my culture, and this, I think, the train accident kind of removed, the illusion when you're anorexic is that once you achieve this perfect state of beauty, that, all of your problems will evaporate, and this had kind of exposed, this train accident had kind of exposed the lie of that, and also removed this, ultimate, the goal of achieving this perfect beauty was no longer attainable. I could never do it because I had this ghastly scar.
You really can't, I can't tell.
Well, now,
really,
this
but
was 10 years ago.
I imagine,
so.
yeah, 150 stitches.
Yeah,
Wow.
I lost a
Oh my
tooth.
God.
It was pretty
Wow.
embarrassing, you know, on top of the physical embarrassment of it. You know, my family had already done a lot to try to help me, and then they had to save me again. And this
But you turned it
more.
around, and then you recovered, and...
Right, yeah. I started working with kids who, my boyfriend's mom worked in an elementary school, and half the student body was homeless, was legally homeless, and I started working with this group of these kids who were emotionally and behaviorally disabled, and it removed the focus from myself, and also kind of like showed me how narcissistic and shallow these goals had been, and how much better I felt actually, you know, helping others.
You wrote in an essay that an eating disorder is inherently narcissistic. How did helping these kids that really had nothing kind of help your recovery?
Well, the kids didn't know anything about my past and didn't care how I was feeling about my body that day, and I think I no longer had time to care about that either, because their need was so great, and they didn't have a choice like I did. You know, to the extent that an eating disorder is a choice. I had certainly been given enough tools to help myself once I finally decided to do that. And these kids, you know, they didn't have, you know, I was their help.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
And do you believe bulimia and anorexia, any kind of eating disorder, do you see that as an addiction?
It's a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking about yourself and about the world, and you know, as a writer, I become kind of obsessively fixated on different things, and so once I started really seriously writing, I could, you know, I kind of recognized the mode of thinking that is an eating disorder as something that I could kind of set aside and replace with another mode of thinking, whatever it was that I was writing about, whether religion or, you know, a pyramid scheme, or, you know, and so in that way, you know, it's a way of thinking that I can kind of choose to engage with or not.
Right.
So I think it's a little, in that way, it's a little bit different from.
And your outlet now is writing.
Yeah.
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 In your novel, you actually, you almost give the fault to society. She's addicted to celebrity magazines, and she's addicted to diet pills, and, you know, they stop along the road to fill up the gas, and she goes in and buys these diet pills over the counter and sees stacks of who lost 10 pounds and the best, you know, tips to getting slim for your bikini body. Yeah. What role does society play in the anorexia epidemic?
Well, it's a very dysmorphic way of thinking of bodies, and a very consumerist way of thinking about people's bodies, in the sense that we can kind of chop people up and look at their different parts completely removed from the human inhabiting that body. You know, we talk about people's legs as if they're things that can be kind of like independently sculpted, and, you know, or, you know, the shape of your body being something that is a seasonal concern. You know, removed from the idea of health, you know, of your body as something that actually supports life. And it's a cultural sickness. Culture was something that I, as an anorexic person, used to abuse myself.
Yeah, it was nice seeing that play so much into the novel, and that be such a big theme. These magazines, stacks of magazines she had in her room. She
is a victim in a way, but I wanted to find, you know, sort of the part of her that is aware of her of this kind of abusive language about women, about bodies, and turn that outward somehow. Right. I didn't want her to be only a victim. I wanted her to, in the end, you know, find a way to take charge and externalize her anger, to turn the abuse outward instead of focusing on herself.
Now I want to talk about your new book, Sunshine State, which is coming out this April. It's about growing up in Florida, memoirs. I had the pleasure of reading it this weekend, but what can we all look forward to in April when it comes out? What kind of stories do you tell?
So Sunshine State is a collection of 8 essays that are organized around, they're all set in whole or in part in Tampa Bay, Florida, which is where I grew up. And I would say about half of the essays are memoir, and half of them are sort of investigative journalism, looking at a range of topics and themes, from religion to pyramid schemes, homelessness, local ecology, death. I, you know, interviewed many people for this book and conducted research for about a year. Took multiple research trips to Florida, volunteered for 6 weeks in a bird sanctuary, shadowed a formerly homeless minister who runs a free meal program, interviewed my parents extensively about their religious history, because while I was growing up, we were part of this marginal religion.
A lot of people don't really know about what the New Thought Unity movement is and about that faith. You were raised going to that church and have recently kind of returned. Can you explain what it's all about?
Sure. So Unity is a denomination of the New Thought movement, which is kind of a marriage of Christian Science and Eastern philosophy. I find it very interesting because there's this real focus on positivity and negativity, positive affirmation, and denial of negativity in your life. And the idea is that you can really shape your material reality. The true reality is spirit. So as children of God, we can train our minds to shape the material world. And so this is the
so our mind is all powerful, is kind of what...
Exactly, yeah. So the material world is actually just an illusion that we bring about with our mind.
Right. This reminds me of something you wrote about your mother's first marriage to an abusive man, and she had this kind of epiphany moment of clarity when she was, curled up on the floor, and she realized that while he could physically control her, he couldn't control her mind.
Emily Cady, who was one of the great Unity writers, in writing about escaping danger or negativity in your life, says that freedom has to be won in the silence of your own mind first. So even though my mom didn't read those words for many years after that moment with her first husband, after she realized that he could never control her mind, but having that epiphany was a sort of first step toward freedom.
Right. Did you have a similar epiphany or realization in your own abusive relationship with your body?
I don't know. That's a very good question. I think there must have been a moment like that where I realized, and maybe it happened with a train accident where I realized that this body that I've been carrying around and abusing was actually not my true self. Yeah.
How in other ways have the Unity teachings affected you? You stopped going when you were about 12 and then came back recently in 2015.
I told my husband recently that I kind of believe I'm psychic, but I think really what I meant was that my mind knows a lot more than I know that it knows. In smaller ways, I have, I think, little superstitions. I think we all carry around superstitions from our religions, which is not the same thing as religion, but something that does affect how I live my life.
Inherently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just little ways of thinking, but I don't like to voice my concerns. I don't really talk about my fear very much, and instead I think in the past I've done this too much, but kind of denied that bad things were happening because I didn't want to make them real or more real, or so.
Right, to manifest them, whereas
if
you thought too much about them, they might actually, or even said it out loud, would mean that it was something that you had to address.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I've actually, I talk about it in the book, but when I was in 5th grade, I started going to a new school where I didn't make friends very easily because I'm kind of shy, and I got out of a third of the school year by making myself sick, just thinking that I wanted to be sick and didn't want to go to school, but it actually happened. And I think in smaller ways throughout my life I've done little things like that, and some part of me still believes that it's real.
Yeah. Another one of my favorite moments in Sunshine State is when you write about your first visit to New York, when you came to look at colleges here. And your first night, you kind of had a scary experience involving 2 older men.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that the majority of women in this country, especially New York, have been sexually harassed at some point. And without giving too much away, can you talk about how that experience affected you?
Yeah, that was terrifying. These 2 men, I was in my senior year of high school, and I was taking photography class, and was really in love with photography, enthusiastic about it, and I was outside on the curb pointing my camera toward Times Square, taking a picture, when these 2 men came up behind me and just started kind of hitting on me, but I was young and naive and didn't really realize. I thought they actually had an interest in who I was, and I was taking pictures. But by the end of our encounter, one of them tried to pull me into a taxi and shoved a $20 bill in my pocket, and I was, I could have easily been sold into slavery, and I really think that they would have taken me somewhere and hurt me. But before that happened, the first one, the older man, who was the one I was talking to the whole time, who was actually not the one who pulled me into the taxi, but he kind of forced me to take this picture of this couple outside of a bar, and I didn't know why it was interesting, but later
he told you it was interesting.
He
so
told
you
me
had
it
to
was.
take it.
Yeah, he said he saw me taking a picture of Times Square. He said,
Right.
"You don't want to take a picture of Times Square. Everybody does that. You need a story." And he showed me this couple outside of a bar arguing, and forced me to take this picture. And I took it back to Florida with me and developed it in my photography class. And for the rest of the year, every time I took a picture, I was like, "This has a story, and you need a story to get people interested." And that's kind of a theme running through the book too. That in order to really draw people in and make them care, you have to tell them a good story.
Right.
And I know that this encounter with this man, horrible as it was, really shaped the way I think about art and especially writing, but even in my visual art, something I think about a lot. Where's the tension between these? I think about character and setting and the tension in the setting. And
where's the story?
Where's the story? Yeah.
How do you think that we as women, but also men, in the society can prevent this kind of vicious behavior that happens far too often, not only here, but everywhere?
How can we prevent it?
Yeah, or just educate.
Street harassment is a symptom of, the patriarchy that controls all of our behavior. So, I think it really, again, like we have to tell a story. We have to tell a story about women having value, and especially young women. Especially, very vulnerable young women.
Yeah. Do you think, you now teach writing workshops.
Yeah.
Do you help young women express those stories in any way?
I help people express their stories all the time, and a lot of their stories, include material like this, and I encourage I talk a lot about narrative lens in my workshop, and part of that is culture. How is the culture of this story shaping these characters, and how is it controlling their movement, and how does it lead them to behave? How does the setting, which includes the culture, direct the story?
Well, Sarah, that's all the time that we have for now. With me today was Sarah Gerard. Her new book, Sunshine State, will be out this April 2017, and her debut novel, Binary Star, is sold in nearly every bookstore. And if you really can't get enough, she teaches writing workshops and publishes a monthly column for Hazlitt. Her website is sarah-gerard.com. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Challis.